Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We've got a lot to get to today, including the opening of 28 Years Later, which was a career high for both its writer and director, and Elio, which was far from a franchise high for Pixar. So let's jump right into it, and we will start with the latest box office numbers for June 20th through the 22nd. The number one movie for a second week in a row was How to Train Your Dragon, which brought in $36.5 million, but it had a 56.8% drop, which is a lot steeper than I anticipated because the reaction to the film was pretty strong. So we'll have to see how it holds up in the next few weeks. 28 Years Later opened in second place at just over $30 million. I was actually surprised that the finals came in about where the estimates were because word of mouth was very mixed on this film. It had a B- cinema score, and what you might see often over the course of a weekend is for those grosses to drop as word of mouth spreads. But 28 Years Later was able to weather the first weekend of its release, and we'll see how it does in weekend two. Opening in third place was Elio, which brought in $20.8 million, the lowest opening weekend ever for a Pixar film. And we're going to break down Elio's performance in just a few minutes, but not great news for Disney or Pixar. In fourth place is Lilo and Stitch, which has been good news for Disney. It dropped 38% in its fifth weekend and brought in $9.7 million. In fifth place was Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, which brought in $6.4 million. Followed by Materialists from A24. This is a movie that did weather some mixed word of mouth. It dropped 48.7% and brought in $5.8 million in weekend number two. From the World of John Wick, Ballerina comes in seventh place at $4.5 million. It's now past the $50 million domestic mark. Karate Kid Legends brought in $2.3 million. It's getting close to the $50 million domestic mark. Final Destination Bloodlines spending what might be its last weekend in the top 10 after a very successful run. It brought in $1.8 million. And then in 10th place was Kubera, which brought in $1.75 million. This is a film from India, played in limited release, about the moral struggles faced by a group of people when a hidden oil reserve is found. Not officially reporting grosses for this past weekend was the movie Bridehard. I've seen some unofficial reporting saying that it made about $900,000 in around 1,100 theaters, so not a huge amount of audience interest in that film. Dropping out of the top 10, we had Sinners after 9 weeks, currently the longest run in the top 10 for a 2025 release. The Phoenician Scheme is out after 2 weeks, and The Life of Chuck out after just 1 week. Despite the Toronto International Film Festival Audience Award, it just hasn't caught on with audiences. I wonder if Neon might be reconsidering their decision to drop this film in the middle of the summer movie season instead of at the end of the year in the fall awards season. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, Karate Kid Legends lost about a third of its theaters, 1,002 of them. It's still in 2006. From the World of John Wick, Ballerina lost 872 theaters. It's still in about 2,500. Bring Her Back is almost out of release completely. It dropped 844 theaters. It's about two-thirds of the theaters it had left. It's now in just 406. Final Destination Bloodlines lost 796 theaters, but it's still in 1,342. And The Phoenician Scheme lost a big chunk of its theaters, 630 of them. It's still in about 1,100. This is what I like to call our road to recovery. The blue line is the box office weekend average for 2015 to 2019. The red line is 2021 to 2024. And the dotted black line is every weekend this year. We had a really good April going into May, but June has been a bit of at least a come down. I'm not going to say letdown, but definitely a come down from the box office highs we've seen the past couple months. We're basically right above where we have been since theaters reopened and far from the peak that we normally see at this time of the summer box office season. We just have had some movies that are either hits but not huge hits, or movies like Elio that have not opened to great box office numbers. We'll see if we can turn this around this upcoming weekend with F1 and Megan 2.0 hitting theaters. So let's talk about some of the movies that are in the top 10, and we will start with the number one movie in the country, How to Train Your Dragon. When we look at the franchise so far, 3 animated films and now 1 live action film, you can see that the live action remake is very close to overtaking the gross of How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, which is in third place, and How to Train Your Dragon 2, which is only about $17 million ahead of the new live-action remake. So the film looks headed towards the highest gross in franchise history. When you adjust those for inflation, however, this year's How to Train Your Dragon is still about $40 million away from passing How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. It's about $80 million away from How to Train Your Dragon 2, and needs to double its domestic gross if it wants to get ahead of the original How to Train Your Dragon, which was released back in 2010. 28 years later has a much easier road to become the highest grossing film in that franchise. When we look at the highest domestic opening weekends for the 28 Later franchise, you can see that it had easily the best opening in franchise history. It tripled the opening of 28 Days Later back in 2003, as well as 28 Weeks Later back in 2007. And even when you adjust for inflation, 28 Years Later opened to $30 million, 28 Days Later opened to an adjusted $17.5 million, and 28 Weeks Later opened to an adjusted $15.2 million. So by just about any metric, the biggest launch for a film in that franchise domestically so far, and also the biggest launch for a movie directed by Danny Boyle. $30 million almost doubles his biggest opening ever, which was Yesterday at $17 million. Then we had The Beach, which is kind of at the height of Leo Mania, at $15.2 million. Slumdog Millionaire, which made $10.6 million in its wide opening weekend. It had made some money in limited release. This was its wide opening weekend, but it had great legs and made even more money around the time of the Oscars. So this is what looks like a lower opening that is a bit misleading when it comes to Slumdog Millionaire's overall gross. 28 Days Later opened to $10 million. Then we have the opening of Steve Jobs at $7.1 million. 127 Hours, now $2.1 million is its highest grossing weekend in limited release because it never actually played in wide release, so I chose the highest grossing limited release weekend. Then we have A Life Less Ordinary, which is a movie from the late 90s that I had pretty much forgotten about until I saw this poster, and it all kind of came flooding back. Trainspotting's at $1.4 million. That was its highest grossing weekend in limited release. And then Sunshine, which was a Danny Boyle, Alex Garland team-up with $1.2 million, its highest grossing weekend in limited release. And it was also the highest opening weekend for Alex Garland. He just set his own personal record last year with Civil War, but he's topped it with 28 Years Later. $30 million for 28 Years Later, $25.5 for Civil War. Then we have Annihilation, which opened to $11 million. That movie deserved better, but it was a little too weird for a lot of mainstream audiences. 28 Days Later is in fourth place. Warfare from this year is in fifth place at $8.3 million. Then we have Dread at $6.2 million. This is Alex Garland as writer and director, not just the movies he's directed. That's why you see movies like Dread and 28 Days Later on this list. Ex Machina is in seventh place at $5.3 million. Then Men at $3.2 million. Sunshine with its highest gross in limited release at $1.2 million. And then Never Let Me Go with just over $400,000, which was its highest grossing weekend in limited release. So from a franchise high, we go to a franchise or at least company low for Pixar because Elio did not, well, I'm not even going to say break out. Elio did not survive in its opening weekend as Pixar, I'm sure, was hoping that it would do. $20.8 million is the lowest gross ever for a Pixar film in wide release. It comes in below the $29.1 million that Toy Story made in 1995 after opening on Wednesday. That's just how far we've fallen. Remember how we talked about Elemental having at that time, very disastrous opening weekend that it recovered from. It still opened about $10 million higher than Elio. It grossed about half of what Onward did back in 2020. And when you look at it adjusted for inflation, of course, it doesn't look better. About $10 million behind Elemental, $27 million behind Onward, $31 million behind The Good Dinosaur, $34 million behind Lightyear, which at that time seemed to be almost as low as Pixar could go. So really no upside when it comes to this opening for Pixar. Now, as I've said on the show before, and as Elemental proved a couple of years ago, it's not all about the opening weekend, and Elemental was able to recover and have a respectable domestic and worldwide gross. I still don't think, and a lot of people said that Elemental recovered and became a massive hit. Elemental still was not a massive hit, but it was able to save face and I think eventually turn profitable in the streaming window, not the theatrical window. But I just don't know what the prospects are for Elio because it has a lot of competition coming up. I would say stiffer competition than Elemental had, even though the reviews have been strong. Audience word of mouth, if you look at Cinema Score, has been strong. But Elio just wasn't able to appeal to a wide audience. And a lot of people have been pointing their fingers at original animation versus sequel animation. And I think that that is a valid discussion. But I think it's also a deeper conversation when we talk about Pixar, because going back to 2020 with the release of Onward, Onward had similar reviews to Elio. It had a similar audience reaction. It opened right as COVID fears were reaching their peak. I mean, it made $40 million or just below $40 million on its opening weekend, literally the week before theaters started to shut down. And yet it still was able to open to about double what Elio was. So I don't think it's just about original animation versus sequel animation. I think what we're really looking at here is a devaluation of the Pixar brand. I went back and I crunched the numbers for the 2020s versus the 2010s. And original animation really isn't in that much of a different place when you look at box office opening weekends. There has been a decrease over the decades, but not as drastic as we've seen for Pixar. The average opening weekend for Pixar's 6 original movies released in the 2010s was about $60 million versus the $30 million average we've seen in the 2020s. So that's about a 50% drop. The opening weekends for original animated films from other studios have only dropped about 33% from the 2020s to the 2010s. So while the original versus animated discussion is worth having when it comes to Pixar, it's not necessarily that their original movies are failing to draw an audience. It's that the struggles that other studios have had are finally happening consistently to Pixar. And that's why I say it's about brand devaluation. I think sending movies like Turning Red to streaming at a time when other originals were returning to theaters, I think sent a message to audiences from Disney that Pixar movies were no longer must-sees in theaters, and we're now seeing that bear out. Before the pandemic, I think that Pixar did have a brand name that suggested audiences did need to see it in theaters, and even their box office disappointments still managed usually at least a respectable opening. And so Disney has a lot of work to do if they want to get people back out into theaters to see Pixar films, especially Pixar original films that don't have a pre-existing brand attached to them other than the Pixar name, because what we are seeing is a bigger drop-off for Pixar from where they were than we're seeing from other studios. And that means it's not just an audience issue or an originals issue. This is a Disney issue, and one that they need to address. One film from Disney that has not had to worry about audience turnout is Lilo and Stitch, and we can see here the race for what will be the highest grossing domestic movie of the year so far. And the trend that we've been seeing over the last couple weeks is really holding true, which is that a Minecraft movie, the current #1 movie of the year domestically, opened up a bigger lead. Lilo and Stitch caught up over the Memorial Day weekend and into that week. Then they were very close together for a few days. But a Minecraft movie has been tracking ahead, and it's been the same pattern. It opens up the lead on the weekends. That lead closes a little bit during the summer weekdays, but then a Minecraft movie widens that gap a bit more on the weekend again. Now, we've seen a bit of a tightening, so I think it's going to be very close as to what movie ends up at #1, but a Minecraft movie still has that edge. Nothing really to complain about, though, for Lilo and Stitch. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is another movie that I've been tracking. Its domestic gross has now officially passed the gross of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, and it is close to the unadjusted gross of the original Mission Impossible. And really, you can see through this tracker, through 5 weekends, just how The Final Reckoning has achieved separation from the last film in the franchise, Dead Reckoning Part 1, or just Dead Reckoning now. And this really goes to show you the difficulty that the last Mission Impossible film had after about 9 or 10 days in theaters when it was in the teeth of Oppenheimer and Barbie. That effect is becoming much more pronounced as we see The Final Reckoning leg out and now officially pass the last Mission Impossible film. Now, as I've talked about on the show before, this does not make The Final Reckoning a box office success in the theatrical window, but it does show us that it's had better staying power than the last movie in the series, and that is a small win for this movie, even though there aren't a whole lot of objective wins box office wise. So 28 Years Later opens at number 1, and it was the best opening in franchise history, and also the first number 1 opening for a film in the franchise. And that takes us to this week's Charts with Dan trivia question. 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later both opened below the second weekend of films featuring Marvel superheroes. What were those films? I gave you the release dates already in this episode, so I'm not going to give it to you again. I'll give you a minute to think, and I'll give you the answer right now. Those two films were Hulk in 2003 and Spider-Man 3 in 2007. The original 28 Days Later actually opened number 4 behind the opening weekend of Charlie's Angels Full Throttle, the second weekend of Hulk, and the 5th weekend of Finding Nemo. 28 Weeks Later opened in second place behind the second weekend of Spider-Man 3. So while the MCU didn't get in the way of 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later because it didn't exist yet, those pesky Marvel superheroes were already there. For last week's member poll question, I asked channel members what 1997 film they'd like to see a sequel to set 28 years later. And the number 1 answer actually kind of surprised me. It was The Fifth Element with 28 votes. I think that that's an interesting film, but I also don't know if I'd want to see another Fifth Element or an updated Fifth Element without being able to have Bruce Willis in the lead role. But that was easily the leading vote getter. And second place is a movie that I might have voted for, which was Face Off with 19 votes. Then we had The Game, starring Michael Douglas and directed by David Fincher, in third place with 14 votes. In fourth place was Good Will Hunting, which got 10 votes. And tied for fifth place was both Event Horizon and The Full Monty, which actually already had its sequel series, but I guess people just want to see that made into a movie. There were some interesting choices that didn't make the top 5 that I think actually I might be more interested in, including Gattaca and Contact, but these were the 5 chosen by the members here on the channel. And this week's member question, as we prepare to greet F1 into movie theaters, is what is the best racing/driving movie of all time? Usually I put a restriction or some kind of a boundary on the answers for this. This one I'm just going to leave wide open. However you define a racing/driving movie, you can leave that answer in the comments of the member poll, which is live right now. You can upvote your favorite if your favorite answer is already there, and the 5 picks with the most upvotes will be revealed here next week. And if you're not a member here on the channel, you can join right now. Depending on how you're watching, there might be a button for you to push that says Become a Member, or you can find a link down in the description below. I'd love to have you join in on these member polls every week. You also get early access to some of my videos and custom emoji to use down in the comments section that lets everybody know that you're a channel member. I'd love to come have you be part of the group. Let's turn our attention now from the domestic marketplace to the international marketplace. These are all markets outside of the US and Canada. And the top movie internationally, no surprise, was How to Train Your Dragon, which brought in $53.5 million. 28 Years Later comes in second place with $30 million, followed by the Chinese film She's Got No Name, which made $23.6 million exclusively in China. This is a crime film based on a true story, starring Zhang Ziyi as a woman accused of murdering her husband. Lilo and Stitch brought in another $19.7 million internationally. And Elio, also not a very impressive gross in the countries where it opened, which was most of the international market. It made $14 million. China is still a key market where it has yet to open, but we have not seen a lot of huge success for Hollywood films in China recently. When you take those international numbers and you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get the top 5 films worldwide. And How to Train Your Dragon led the way with $90.1 million. That's a 54.4% drop, so it saw a similar drop worldwide as it did domestically. Its current worldwide gross is $358.1 million. 28 Years Later debuted to just over $60 million worldwide. It was made on a reasonable budget, so it's looking like this is a film that could very easily turn a profit in the theatrical window. Elio debuts to $34.8 million worldwide. Lilo and Stitch dropped 37.1% and brought in another $29.4 million. It's now at $910 million as it tries to do what a Minecraft movie could not and inch to that $1 billion mark. And She's Got No Name rounds out the top 5 at $23.6 million. And when we look at the How to Train Your Dragon franchise by worldwide gross, you can see that the remake is closing in on the original. It's at $358.1 million. How to Train Your Dragon brought in $495.1 million. And if the live-action remake wants to be the top-grossing film in franchise history, it's going to have to reach the $614.5 million worldwide that How to Train Your Dragon 2 made about 10 years ago. We've got so much more to cover on this week's show, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this episode. This episode is brought to you by the new game, The Cast List. I mentioned The Cast List when it came out, and I'm so happy to have them on board as an official partner of the show. The Cast List is a fast-paced movie trivia game that anyone can play, and if you know me, you know that I love movie trivia. Plus, it was created by my old Schmodown partner, Ben Bateman, so we're keeping it in the family. When you and your friends or family sit down to play the Cast List, each person gets a set of cards with an actor on it and some of their movies also listed. The goal is to get your team to guess the actor by naming the fewest amount of movies. So the more movies you have to name, the smaller your point total is. And you only have 30 seconds, so time is of the essence. There are actors on these cards from the 1950s to today, so it doesn't matter if you're a classic movie fan or if you're more into the newer stuff. And with over 200 actors in the game, you can play again and again. The Cast List also has regular mode, lightning mode, where you play as fast as possible, and challenge mode, where you get to give out just one movie per card, so you can play with any group from casual fans to hardcore cinephiles. The Cast List is available right now online at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, so pick up your game today and start playing. Let's take a look now at some of what I like to call our specialty charts, and we will start with the top per theater averages. At number 1, this is not a mistake, is Apocalypse Now, which played in one theater. This is a revival showing that they're calling the Roadshow edition, basically showing the film as it was shown when it was originally released back in 1979. It brought in $15,161. In second place is Familiar Touch, which also played in just one theater. It's from writer-director Sarah Freeland about an elderly woman who's moving into assisted living, and it won the Best Film Debut prize at the Venice Film Festival last year. In third place was 28 Years Later, which brought in $8,712 per theater in 3,444 theaters. Then we have How to Train Your Dragon, which brought in a similar number, $8,364 per theater, but in about 1,000 more theaters. It's a massive release on How to Train Your Dragon. And in fifth place is a 4K restoration of Shanghai Blues, which played in just one theater and brought in $7,279 in that theater. Shanghai Blues is a restoration of director Hark Tsui's 1984 film. He's gone on to direct many of China's biggest ever box office hits. Looking at the top 5 films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, at number 1 is Kubera, which brought in $1.75 million. Then with a gross of just over $1 million, we have Sitar Zameen Par. And from what I can read, it's kind of a Mighty Ducks story from India about a basketball coach who's sentenced to coach an underdog basketball team. In third place is the 20th anniversary of Brokeback Mountain, which brought in just over $500,000 in 754 theaters. Then we have another Western, a much different one though, called The Unholy Trinity, which brought in $85,000 in its second week. And in fifth place is Utshab, which made $53,000 in 36 theaters. This is a film from Bangladesh about a cranky old man who sees the error of his ways. This is the 2025 domestic summer box office so far, and you can see that we have 3 new movies on the list. 28 Years Later is now at number 8 with its $30 million opening. Materialist joins the list at number 9, and then Elio is able to scrape out a number 10 spot with its $20.8 million opening. That kicks Bring Her Back, Friendship, and The Last Rodeo off the list. Ballerina moves up to number 6 with Karate Kid Legends moving down to number 7. How to Train Your Dragon moves up to number 4 for the summer with Final Destination Bloodlines moving down to number 5. And when we look at my predictions versus the actual summer box office so far, Lilo and Stitch was my prediction for number 1 movie of the summer. It's still there at number 1. How to Train Your Dragon I picked to be number 2. I think that was too high, but currently How to Train Your Dragon is up to number 4. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, my number 5 pick for the summer, is now number 3. And then we have Elio, which I put on my list at number 9 because I said it was tough for me to leave a Disney Pixar film off of the summer top 10 altogether. But I think that this is going to be my first movie that doesn't make the overall summer top 10, or at a minimum, it's going to be in serious danger of not making it, because even if it is able to do 7 times its opening weekend, that's how much it would have to make to get past the current gross of Final Destination Bloodlines. Even Elemental only did a little bit better than 5 times its opening weekend. So the red lights are flashing for Elio, very possibly the first casualty of my top 10 summer movie prediction list. This is the 2025 domestic box office so far for the entire year. A Minecraft movie at number 1 at $423.9 million. Lilo and Stitch is at $386.7 million. Sinners, Captain America: Brave New World, and Thunderbolts round out the top 5. Mission Impossible for now is at number 6. How to Train Your Dragon moves up 3 spots to number 7, which bumps Final Destination Bloodlines down 1 spot to number 8, Dogman down to number 9, and Snow White down to number 10. And this is the 2025 worldwide box office so far. Lilo and Stitch is closing in on the worldwide gross of a Minecraft movie. It's only about $43 million behind right now. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is at number 4. How to Train Your Dragon breaks onto the list at number 9, and it is close to passing the worldwide gross for Sinners and Thunderbolts. Final Destination Bloodlines moves down 1 spot to number 10, and Snow White drops off of the 2025 worldwide box office top 10. And that's what's going on at the box office. Very quickly, let's take a look at the world of streaming, which has seen its own version of a blockbuster movie the last couple of weeks. This is the latest data from Netflix, which covers June 9th through the 15th. And Tyler Perry's latest film, Straw, absolutely exploded in its first full week on the streaming service with 48.89 million views. I suspect that social media had a lot to do with it because I saw a lot of references to Straw in the days after its release. In second place was KO, which brought in 19.45 million views. Titan, the Ocean Gate disaster, was in third place. It brought in 17.36 million views. This is a Netflix original documentary. Ginny and Georgia Season 3 held strong in week 4 with 16.87 million views, followed by The Survivors in 5th place, Mercy for None in 6th. In 7th place was Our Times, a Netflix original film from Mexico about scientists from the 60s who time travel to our current day. It brought in just over 7 million views. Then we have the Gerard Butler movie Plane, because why not, at 6.29 million views. In 9th place was another Netflix original documentary, Trainwreck: The Astroworld Tragedy, about the deadly 2021 crowd crush in Houston at a Travis Scott concert. It brought in 6.22 million views. And A Widow's Game rounds out the Netflix top 10. And when I said that Straw exploded in week number 2, it actually put up the best weekly view number for any movie on Netflix this year at 48.89 million views. That dethrones the first and second week of the Jamie Foxx Cameron Diaz movie Back in Action, which had matching weeks of 46.79 million views. Exterritorial's debut week gets bumped down to 4th place, and the debut of Havoc gets bumped down to 5th place. And Straw also had the second best week as far as views for all programming on Netflix, coming only behind the second week of Squid Game Season 2 at 58.12 million views. Then we have Straw at 48.89, the first and second week of Back in Action at 46.79 million views, and the second week of Adolescence, which similarly blew up in its second week of release at 42 million views. Straw is also the 5th most watched movie on Netflix so far this year at 74.17 million views, and plenty of room to grow. By next week, it will probably be at number 2, having passed Havoc, Exterritorial, and The Life List. Counterattack, Ad Vitam, The Electric State, Nona's, and I Hostage all move down 1 spot, and Despicable Me 4 moves off of the most watched movies of 2024 list. Looking at the overall most watched programs on Netflix this year, either movie or show, Straw is at number 7, which drops Counterattack, Ad Vitam, and The Electric State down 1 spot. 0 Day is out of the top 10 so far this year. The top 6 remain the same, with Back in Action, the most viewed program so far this year at 149.84 million views, with Adolescence close behind at 142.58 million views. Let's take a look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, unlike the Netflix numbers we just saw, these are not global numbers. They are domestic only, and they're delayed by about a month because that's how long it takes Nielsen to get us that data. So these are the most watched streaming movies for May 19th through the 25th. At number 1 was Instant Family with 8 million hours watched. The Wild Robot, which pops back on the chart due to it finally hitting Netflix after its Peacock exclusive window, is in second place at 7.3 million hours watched. Then we have Nona's, followed by the original Lilo and Stitch. A lot of people watching the original to either get ready for the new one or to watch after the new one. Apple's original film Fountain of Youth debuts in 5th place at 5.8 million hours watched, followed by the Netflix original film Fear Street Prom Queen and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning on Paramount Plus. A lot of people rewatching that movie. Remember, this is leading into the Memorial Day weekend. That's why we see so many tie-ins with the box office performers that week. Moana 2 is at number 8, followed by A Deadly American Marriage on Netflix and Novocaine on Paramount Plus. And when we look at the most watched streaming movies of the year so far in the US, according to Nielsen, through May 25th, Nona's is now number 6 on this list, which bumps down Kraven the Hunter, The Life List, Den of Thieves 2, and Havoc. Amazon's original film You're Cordially Invited is now off the list, and Moana 2 still remains easily the most watched streaming movie of the year at 105.9 million hours watched. These were the most watched streaming shows for the week of May 19th through the 25th. At number 1 was the debut week of Sirens, which I just noted is now one of Netflix's most watched shows of the year. It debuted to 22.6 million hours watched here in the US. NCIS is in second place, followed by Bluey and the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. SpongeBob SquarePants had a good week on the charts at 12.4 million hours watched, followed by Grey's Anatomy and The Last of Us. Then we have Criminal Minds, The Handmaid's Tale, and The Big Bang Theory all returning to the chart, but also shows that we have seen many times on the chart before. Sirens had a good debut in the US when it comes to streaming series. It was the second best debut for a new show so far this year, behind Zero Day, which debuted to 30.4 million hours watched. Sirens comes in at 22.6, which is just ahead of The Residents and also ahead of The Four Seasons and American Primeval. Last week I talked about The Last of Us and its viewing trend for Season 2 compared to Season 1, and the latest numbers we have, and we're getting to the end of the second season, show that there is still a significant decline in viewership according to Nielsen data for Season 2 versus Season 1. We'll see what other viewing figures we're going to be able to get for this next season. But there were already indications from other viewership reporting services that Season 2 had a significant decline in viewership. We are seeing this bear out on Nielsen as well. When we look at the top 20 streaming shows from May 19th through the 25th as far as watch time per available episodes, so we take the total watch time and divide it by the number of episodes available to watch, Sirens dominates the charts with 4.52 million hours watched per episode. American Manhunt Osama bin Laden continues to perform well at 2.59 million hours per episode. Secrets We Keep comes in at just over 1 million hours watched per episode. Then we have The Four Seasons, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, The Last of Us, Mobland, Poker Face, Andor spending one more week on the chart with 365,000 hours watched per episode, and The Handmaid's Tale as it approaches its series finale at 163,000 hours watched per episode. And Sirens also put up one of the best per episode watch times of the year so far with its 4.52 million hours per episode. That puts it ahead of American Murder, Gabby Petito, and behind Squid Game, Zero Day, and Adolescence. Adolescence still for the week of March 17th to the 23rd has the best watch time per episode number of the year at just over 6 million hours per episode. And that does it for Charts with Dan this week. Before we go, I just wanted to mention a few things you might be interested in as we get further into this week. First of all, debuting today on Disney Plus is the long, I don't want to say delayed series, but certainly the long-awaited series Ironheart. Its first 3 episodes will be available to watch. Tomorrow on Wednesday, the most hilarious show on television, The Bear Season 4, drops all 10 of its episodes on Hulu, so if you've been waiting to see what happens with Carmi's new restaurant, you don't have that much longer to wait. Then on Friday, we have F1 or F1 the movie hitting theaters. My review of the film is already out here on the channel, so you can check that out. And also keep in mind there are some early access screenings that are happening tomorrow night on Wednesday if you want to check out F1 early. Megan 2.0 also hits theaters. I'm curious to see what exactly is going on with this film. I think I might check it out just out of morbid curiosity, and if it's worth talking about, I'll bring you my thoughts. Opening and limited release this upcoming weekend is Sorry Baby. Of all the movies that I saw virtually at the Sundance Film Festival this year, this was my favorite one. And spoiler alert, it is in contention to be one of my favorite movies of the year so far. It's tough to suss out what this movie's about because most of the marketing has centered around the main character holding a cat. But I think that this is a very engrossing, deep, sometimes difficult to watch story, a very human story, and I would recommend it if it's playing in theaters near you. Also, on the other end of the spectrum, hitting some theaters nationwide, is Ice Road Vengeance, the latest action film starring Liam Neeson, which is a sequel to his movie The Ice Road, but is not related to 2019's Cold Pursuit, because you see in that movie, Cold Pursuit, Liam Neeson played a vengeful snowplow driver, whereas in the Ice Road Now franchise, he plays a vengeful ice road trucker. So, you got to keep your Neeson straight. Also opening in limited release is a movie that I saw at Sundance about a year and a half ago, which is Pony Boy. Dylan O'Brien is one of the co-stars of this film, and it just shows you how long it can take some of these smaller indie films to finally hit theaters. On Netflix this Friday, Squid Game Season 3, the final season of the show, makes its debut. Although, as I've said before, I think this is really just the second half of Season 2 that they're calling Season 3. And on Sunday, Clueless, the 30th anniversary, which makes me feel ancient, celebration screening, will be hitting theaters through Fathom Events. So if you want to go feel old like me, go watch Clueless celebrate its 30th year. And that's all I've got for you on the show this week. If you want to know what I thought briefly of the new Jurassic World film, Jurassic World Rebirth, I posted my first ever YouTube short with my out of the theater reaction. Strangely, even though it was shown to the public as a screen unseen mystery movie at AMC and at other theater chains, there is still a full review embargo in place. So I can't actually review the movie, and the only way I could is if I weren't a critic. And then I could review the movie. So anyway, I gave you some brief thoughts on Jurassic World Rebirth. You can check out my YouTube shorts right now. And you can check out the channel for the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Thank you as always for listening to me yell some numbers at you. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.